Getting to the heart of the matter. Back to Guy, Ben, and Frank with more Inside the News.
Welcome back to our third segment of Inside the News, and typically this is our election trail segment, and we're going to be dipping into some of that. And you know what, Frank, we've got to talk about this because I think the realization is starting to come out more and more that Joe Biden is more like the figurehead. By the way, Frank Vernuccio is in the top left of your screen on YouTube, and we got Ben Brunson in the bottom middle. Just want to identify that. But you know something, Frank? He's more like a figurehead, and the choice of vice president nominee for the Democratic Party is going to be very vital.
Well, it's kind of interesting how this all dovetails with the reality of the deep state concept.
Yeah.
President Trump, the reaction to Trump was so harsh in Washington simply because he was, to some extent, a bull in a china shop. He decided that Washington no longer represented the American people. It represented a bunch of professional bureaucrats who did what they wanted to do despite the will of the people. When we had the Russian collusion hearings in the House of Representatives, it was kind of fascinating to listen to bureaucrats say that they were stunned when Donald Trump didn't obey their orders. It didn't matter that they had never stood for election, that they had no position to be answerable to the people. They were the deep state. They control things no matter what the will of the people said. I think that outrage among the deep state continues. They are thrilled with the candidacy of Joe Biden, not in spite of his growing senility, but because of his growing senility. The fact is they don't want anyone who is answerable to the people. One of the great sins, according to the political pundits, is that Donald Trump actually is doing what he said he would do when he campaigned. You can't do that. It's the bureaucrats' job to rule this country, not the elected government of the United States. And what we're seeing in the campaign of Joe Biden and support for Joe Biden among official Washington, including some Republicans, by the way, is that they don't like the idea of a president who's responsible not to the bureaucracy, but to the voters.
Boy, well said there, Frank. You know something, Ben, and you're going to comment on that of what Frank just said, but I was talking with someone over the weekend, and they were questioning what was going on with Donald Trump, and we were talking about the deep state. And I said, the fear is now, after 3.5 to 4 years of Donald Trump, if Biden gets elected and he's starting to take out some of that deep state, what's going to happen? They will know where to hide the new deep staters, and they'll be buried so far deep, we'll never get them out. Does that kind of sound like I'm on target there?
Well, look, I think if Biden wins, you will see the revenge of the deep state in spades. And
kind of like Star Wars, huh?
Yeah, the handful of successes that Trump has had in terms of rooting out the deep state and putting people like Bill Barr into power and Mike Pompeo into power, that'll be undone within weeks. Mm-hmm. It'll be undone very quickly. And the problem that Trump faces now is that the deep state is truly deep, and that despite having someone like Mike Pompeo as the Secretary of State, to uproot the infiltration, how pervasive the deep state attitude is within the Department of State, is something that would take 20 years. It would take Trump being reelected and another Trump coming along for another 2 terms to really undo how deeply penetrated this ideology is. And it's a fact that the Democrats and the deep staters have a natural advantage, and that people who have that mindset are attracted to government service and government careers. And people who have a different mind, more the Trump mindset, that, hey, we're in here to do the bidding of the people and do what's right for the country, and we're going to come in and serve for 2, 3, 4 years and then move on. Well, those people come and go, but the career positions are filled by people who are naturally inclined to the deep state mentality and ideology. And that's the problem. And like I said, it's going to be very difficult to ultimately change Washington. And I fear that even if Trump's reelected, When Trump is gone, Washington will quickly revert to its to what it's naturally inclined to do, which is to support the whole deep state agenda of perpetuating the wealth in Washington to the detriment of the people of this country.
Frank, when Trump was elected, what he failed to do was accept everyone's resignation and clean house immediately and put his own people in there. He did not do that. And I think possibly, I don't know for sure, but if he is reelected November 3rd, he may clean house, or he should clean house. We know that if Biden's in there, that's going to be an automatic, that he's going to accept everyone's resignation and he will clean house. Your thoughts?
You know, it's fascinating how the press perceives this. When Bill Clinton took office, he dismissed a substantial portion of lawyers within the Department of Justice.
Yeah.
When George Bush took office, he let go a much smaller number of attorneys from the Department of Justice. Now, when Clinton cleaned house, the press was all for it. In fact, didn't make much of an issue about it at all. When George Bush dismissed a much tinier number of lawyers in the Department of Justice, the headlines on the Washington Post and the New York Times, Saturday Night Massacre, Bush politicizes the Department of Justice. So whenever we see these deep staters dismissed, their links in the media make it sound as though the incoming president is engaging in harsh politics. Whenever a deep stater takes office, well, it's just okay. It's the right thing to do. The hypocrisy is monumental. And by the way, within the Department of State, a lot of people who had been in the State Department under both Ronald Reagan and George Bush the First, and tried to get back into the State Department under President Trump, are finding that the deep staters who are in significant positions still in the Department of State have gone overboard in trying to prevent any conservative types, any Republican types, from getting into positions at the Department of State. At this point in time, the Department of State, in terms of being responsive to the people, is Mike Pompeo and a couple of his personal advisors, but the bureaucracy remains solid left Democrat.
Okay, Ben, we've got about a minute left in this segment. The White House is extremely important, but so is the Senate, because they approve a lot of these people on the cabinet and these judges, and the House is important as well. So we cannot forget November, we've got representatives and senators that need to be elected.
Well, I'll tell you, if you believe the polls, it looks good for the Democrats regaining the Senate, and it looks good for Biden, and we could have a Democratic sweep. I highly suspect those polls as being not truly indicative of what's going on. I think a lot of Republicans and certainly Trump supporters, Trump supporting Republicans, have been cowed into silence. And I think that applies to responding to polls on any level. And my gut says this is certainly going to be a lot closer. Now, the Republicans do need to retain the Senate, or it's going to be a miserable 2 years for Donald Trump. The odds of recapturing the House are, I'll concede that's probably not going to happen unless there's something happening out there that is truly going to be revolutionary. And it's hard to see that happening. So the Senate is a huge battleground, and it's going to be based on turnout, and the turnout has got to be massive for Republicans.
We're up against the gun. This is Inside the News. Frank, Ben, myself, Guy, and we're going to take a break. We're going to be back with our Picking Up the Pieces segment.
You're listening to Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio, Inside the News.